story about Rockefeller's kid? Apparently the first time he went, he insulted them by trying to acquire one of their sacred things. And the second time he went back, they decided to eat him.
History doesn't forgive those who wander too far, but when it does, the stories are unforgettable. From the deepest jungles to islands untouched by time, people ventured further than they should. Missionaries carried faith, explorers carried maps, and wanderers carried curiosity. Some were welcomed, but others met spears, fire, and the unthinkable. Today we reveal 20 true encounters of 20 people who were attacked, eaten, and devoured by tribes. Number 20. Michael Rockefeller. 23-year-old Michael Rockefeller was not just another traveler. He was the son of New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller and part of one of America's most powerful families. In 1961, his name would become tied to one of the most unsettling disappearances of the century. At the time, he was deep in the hot, remote lands of Papua, then known as Dutch New Guinea. This was not a casual visit. Rockefeller was part of an expedition backed by Harvard's Peabody Museum, documenting the culture of the Asmat people. The Asmat were renowned for intricate wood carvings, but also for traditions outsiders found terrifying. Headhunting and cannibalism were still alive in their culture. On November 17, 1961, while traveling with Dutch anthropologist René Wassing, Rockefeller's small catamaran overturned roughly 20 kilometers from shore. They drifted for a full day before Rockefeller decided to take a chance. Using fuel cans for flotation, he slipped into the water, aiming for land. Wassing later recounted watching him paddle away until he vanished from sight. What happened next is still debated. Official records claim he drowned before reaching the coast. Yet other accounts suggest he made it ashore, only to be captured and killed by tribesmen. This is believed to be possibly an act of revenge against Dutch colonial forces. Some even claim he stayed, living out his life in the shadows of the jungle. Which version is true may never be known. Number 19. Percy Fawcett. Colonel Percy Harrison Fawcett was not the kind of man to be satisfied with maps already drawn. A decorated British geographer, archaeologist, and artillery officer, he made his name exploring South America's most unforgiving terrain. What drove him most was the belief in a lost city hidden deep in the Brazilian rainforest. He called it Z, convinced it was built by an ancient, advanced civilization long before European contact. The idea went against the thinking of his time, but Fawcett leaned on old maps, 16th century manuscripts describing abandoned stone structures, and the stories passed down by local tribes. In April 1925, he set off on what would be his last expedition. With him were his 21-year-old son Jack, and Jack's close friend Raleigh Rimmel. Their path led into the thick jungles of Mato Grosso toward the Xingu River. It's a place where survival was never guaranteed. Before leaving, Fawcett insisted that if they vanished, no one should attempt a rescue. From Dead Horse Camp, he sent a letter to his wife, admitting the journey was grueling, but that they intended to press forward. That was the last anyone heard from them. Some accounts suggest they were killed by the Kalapalo or another tribe. Others claim Jack may have married into one. Decades of searches followed, costing more than 100 lives. The jungle has kept its answer. Number 18. The missionaries killed by the Huaorani tribe. They arrived in Ecuador with a single goal, yet what awaited them along the Curaray River would change missionary history forever. In 1955, 5 American evangelical missionaries began reaching out to the Huaorani, a small indigenous group once referred to as the Auca, meaning savage in Quechua. The Huaorani had a reputation for defending their land with deadly force, and outsiders rarely left their territory alive. Still, the missionaries believed they could bridge the divide. From September onward, they flew over the dense jungle in small aircraft, lowering baskets filled with gifts. This included machetes, cooking pots, and other items they hoped would build trust. To their relief, gifts began coming back, including a parrot. On January 3, 1956, the men landed on a sandbar they named Palm Beach and built a temporary shelter. 3 days later, they had their first friendly meeting with 3 Huaorani, one of whom, nicknamed George, accepted a plane ride with pilot Nate Saint. Spirits soared, but the optimism faded quickly. On January 8th, a group of Huaorani warriors descended on the camp. Accounts suggest a misunderstanding may have triggered the attack. Armed with spears, the warriors killed all 5 men. Their bodies were left in the river or at the site, and their plane lay abandoned in the rainforest. When radio contact was lost, rescuers arrived to recover what they could. 4 bodies were found. Yet years later, 2 women connected to the slain men would return, not for revenge, but to live among the Huarani and be accepted. They eventually earned the trust that had cost their loved ones their lives. Number 17. Richard Mason. The jungle can hide many things, but in 1961, it concealed a danger that would end one man's life. Richard Mason was more than just a promising Oxford medical student. He was an explorer, a man tied to the Royal Geographical Society. His curiosity had already carried him across South America in 1958, traveling by Land Rover with fellow adventurers. 3 years later, Mason led an expedition to the Iriri River, a remote and unmapped stretch of water in the Brazilian states of Pará and Mato Grosso. With deputy leader John Hemming and team member Kit Lambert beside him, the mission pressed forward. Supplies, however, ran dangerously low soon after they located the river. In early September, Hemming left for the airstrip in Cachimbo to gather more provisions. That decision left Mason to travel on foot, alone, carrying only basic gear. On September 3rd, his path crossed with the Panará, an isolated tribe who had never been in official contact with outsiders. What happened next was swift and final. The Panará attacked using traditional weapons. Clubs and arrows were later found carefully placed around his body, suggesting a ritual element to the killing. Hemming left gifts such as machetes and fishing line at the spot where Mason had been killed to show they bore no ill will to his killers. Mason's remains were recovered and buried in the British cemetery in Rio de Janeiro. Decades later, in 1998, Hemming met members of the Panará. They explained they had seen Mason as a threat, his unfamiliar clothing making an unusual swish-swish sound that had alarmed them. Number 16. Albert de Winton. The Amazon has swallowed many who dared to enter it, but Albert de Winton's fate still stands out as one of the most unsettling. In 1933, the Welsh-born actor traded Hollywood's lights for the tangled shadows of Brazil's rainforest. His goal was personal: find Colonel Percy Fawcett, the British explorer who had vanished 8 years earlier while chasing the legend of the lost city of Z. At 53, Albert had already appeared in films like The Love Parade and King of the Wild, but the staged excitement of acting no longer satisfied him. He craved danger he could actually feel. Wearing safari gear and carrying a rifle, he entered the Xingu River region, telling those who asked that he would return with Fawcett, dead or alive. Months later, he staggered back, skin drawn tight over bone, his body drained by the jungle. A photograph taken at the time shocked those who saw it. The caption explained it wasn't makeup, it was survival, but rest was brief. Albert returned to the same treacherous region, and then silence. In September 1934, a native messenger arrived carrying a crumpled note. Albert had written that he was being held by a tribe and needed rescue. No rescue came. No body was found. Years later, Brazilian authorities claimed a Kamayura tribesman had smashed Albert's head with a club and had kept his rifle. What truly happened after that note was sent remains locked away in the depths of the rainforest. Number 15. Bruno Manser. Some disappearances seem to swallow a person whole, leaving only questions behind. Bruno Manser, a Swiss environmental and human rights activist, stepped into the depths of Borneo's rainforest in 1984. His goal was simple: live among the Penan, a nomadic tribe in Sarawak, Malaysia. Over 6 years, he learned their language, mastered blowgun hunting, and adapted to their way of life so fully they gave him the name Laki Penan, meaning Penan man. But the forest around them was changing. By 1985, logging companies were tearing into Sarawak's rainforest. Rivers turned murky, wildlife disappeared, and the Penan's survival was at risk. Manser became their voice to the outside world, organizing peaceful road blockades that slowed the loggers' advance. His activism caught global attention, but it also drew the wrath of Sarawak's government. They branded him a threat, reportedly placing a $25,000 bounty on his head. He narrowly escaped arrest in 1986 and finally left Malaysia in 1990, often moving in disguise. Back in Switzerland, he founded the Bruno Manser Fund in 1991, continuing his fight through protests, including a 60-day hunger strike. In 1999, he made headlines again by flying a motorized hang glider near the Sarawak Chief Minister's residence. In May 2000, he returned secretly through Kalimantan to see the Penan once more. On May 25th of that year, he was last seen heading toward Batu Lawi alone. Tracks were later found near a swamp. Beyond that, nothing. 5 years later, a court declared him dead. His body has never been found. Number 14. Thomas Baker. For decades, some parts of the Pacific were approached with caution. Among them was Fiji, a place European sailors once called the Cannibal Isles. In the mid-1800s, Methodist missionary Thomas Baker arrived there with the goal of spreading Christianity. He lived in the islands for 8 years without major incident. That changed in July of 1867 when he traveled deep into the mountainous interior of Viti Levu. His destination was a village in Nabatautau, where he hoped to persuade a local chief to embrace his faith. Accounts differ on what triggered the violence that followed. One story claims Baker offered the chief a wooden comb as a friendly gesture, but later took it back after the chief rejected his religious message. In doing so, he allegedly touched the man's head, something considered highly disrespectful. Others believe the tension had been building for some time, rooted in mistrust toward foreign influence. Whatever the cause, Baker and 7 companions were killed. Their remains were then consumed in what was, at that time, a traditional act. For generations, locals believed this brought a curse on the village. More than a century later, in 2003, 11 of Baker's descendants visited Nabatautau. A formal apology was made, and a ritual was performed to lift the curse that had hung over the community. Number 13. John Allen Chau. He knew the danger before he ever set foot on the water. John Allen Chau, just 26 years old, had spent nearly a decade shaping himself for a mission few would dare to attempt. His faith drove him, as did a fascination with one of the most isolated peoples on Earth, the Sentinelese of North Sentinel Island. He studied linguistics, trained in first aid and wilderness survival, and even practiced enduring cold water and remote living. In October 2018, he arrived in Port Blair, part of India's Andaman and Nicobar Islands. By law, outsiders are banned from the island to protect the tribe from outside diseases and interference. Yet Chau arranged for local fishermen to take him there in secret, paying about $350. They sailed under cover of night to avoid patrols. On November 15th, he twice approached the island in a canoe, offering gifts such as a soccer ball, fish, scissors, and a waterproof Bible. He called out in Xhosa, telling them his name and that both he and Jesus loved them. An arrow fired by a young tribesman pierced his Bible, forcing him to retreat. The next day, he returned. By November 17th, fishermen saw his body dragged along the beach. The Sentinelese are believed to have buried him. Authorities chose not to recover the remains, fearing both violence and the risk of disease. His death ignited fierce debate over faith, law, and contact with uncontacted tribes. Number 12. Stephen Ratton. The jungles of Brazil's Mato Grosso have swallowed many who entered, and in the early 1930s, Stephen Ratton joined that list. Known as a Swiss trapper, hunter, and Indian trader, he had spent years moving through this vast green maze. His reputation for navigating its rivers and forging contact with local tribes was well established. In the spring of 1932, he arrived at the British consulate in São Paulo with a startling account. Months earlier, in a remote native village, he had met a bearded white man who said he was a British colonel. Ratton could not shake the thought that this might be Percy Fawcett, the explorer who had vanished in 1925 while searching for the so-called lost city of Z. The man asked that a message be passed to Major Paget, a friend of Fawcett, so a rescue could be arranged. Ratton wasted little time. He organized a small party and headed back into the jungle. Some accounts place their route along the Arinos River, a stretch not far from where Fawcett was last reported. That was the last anyone heard from them. No bodies, no gear, nothing. Did hostile tribes intercept them, or did the jungle itself claim them? Ratton's disappearance became another thread in the long list of expeditions that entered the Mato Grosso and never returned. Number 11. Missionaries Massacre. The year was 1878. And a Methodist reverend named George Brown decided to send 4 Fijian missionaries to the shores of Papua New Guinea. Missionary work often walked a fine line. Success meant conversion, but a single misstep could bring deadly consequences. This time, the reception was anything but welcoming. Among the Tolai people, a tribal leader named Talele gave an order that would seal the fate of the newcomers. All 4 missionaries were killed, and in an act that would shock outsiders, their bodies were consumed. What happened next was equally brutal. Brown, abandoning the principles he had spent years preaching, organized an armed retaliation. His forces swept through a village believed to have ties to the killings, setting homes ablaze and taking at least 10 lives. For this, he faced no punishment. British colonial authorities cleared him of wrongdoing. Generations passed, and the world around the Tolai changed. By 2007, cannibalism was no longer part of their way of life. That year, the Tolai offered a formal apology for what had happened more than a century earlier. Number 10. Raymond Mofre. Some disappearances leave a trace, others leave only questions. Raymond Moffret was 23 when he decided to push deeper into the wild than most would dare. Born in France, he had already lived a life marked by risk. He fought in the resistance during the war before turning his attention to remote expeditions. By 1946, his travels had taken him to Brazil. There, he spent time among the Javante people, recording his experiences. In June 1949, he began his most ambitious journey. Starting from Cayenne, his aim was to cross the Tumuk-Humak Mountains and follow the Jari River all the way to Belém, entirely on foot. He spent months along the coast and the Mana River. But by late October, he set out again with only basic supplies, expecting to hunt for food as he went. The jungle proved unforgiving. Dysentery weakened him, food became scarce, and exhaustion set in. He had to rely on eating lizards, snails, birds, and seeds. By the time he reached Tamuri, he was too frail to even lift his rifle. In desperation, he killed and ate his dog, Bob. On January 13, 1950, he abandoned his gear and diary and headed into the Tampak River's rapids. No one saw him again. Weeks later, members of the Teco people found his belongings and returned them to French Guiana. His father, Edgar, searched for 12 years, covering thousands of kilometers before collapsing from exhaustion. Raymond's body was never found. Had the river claimed him, or had something else happened in that deep interior? Number 9. John Williams and James Harris. In the early 1800s, one man's devotion to his mission led him far from home and straight into the path of danger. John Williams had spent over 2 decades traveling across the South Pacific, determined to spread his faith. His reputation grew quickly, yet so did the risks. By late 1839, those risks would catch up with him. Alongside fellow missionary James Harris, Williams set sail for Vanuatu, known then as the New Hebrides. Their destination was Erromango, the 4th largest island. Neither man could have known that only days earlier, European sandalwood traders had attacked and killed several locals. The island's mood was tense, suspicion heavy in the air. When Williams and Harris came ashore, they were met not with curiosity, but with hostility. Harris fell first, struck down by heavy blows. Williams ran toward the shore, perhaps hoping the sea might offer an escape. He did not make it. Arrows pierced his body and clubs finished the assault. What happened next still shocks many. Their remains were consumed by the islanders. It was not random violence, but an act shaped by fresh wounds from outsiders. Was this a tragic misunderstanding or inevitable fate for men who stepped into a charged and dangerous moment? Number 8. Giovanni da Verrazzano. He had sailed halfway across the world in search of new routes, but it was not storms or the sea that ended his life. Giovanni da Verrazzano, born in Val di Greve, Tuscany, made his name exploring under the French crown. In 1524, commanding the La Dauphine, he traced the Atlantic coast of North America from present-day North Carolina to Newfoundland. He was the first European to enter New York Bay. However, he could not explore because a storm forced him to move on. Along the way, he met indigenous groups such as the Lenape, and he carefully noted the geography of the coast. By 1528, Verrazzano was at sea again, and this time with a small fleet. His goal was to probe the Central American coast and continue the search for a Pacific passage. That spring, they reached the Lesser Antilles. What happened next comes from his brother Girolamo, a cartographer who later mapped their voyages. Girolamo wrote that Giovanni went ashore on one of the islands, perhaps Guadeloupe or Dominica, with only a small landing party. There, they were seized by the Caribs, a people Europeans described as fierce enemies of outsiders. Some chroniclers claimed the Caribs practiced cannibalism. Girolamo's account says Giovanni was killed, and later versions allege that he was eaten while his helpless crew watched from offshore. Fact or bias, his voyage ended not in discovery, but in violence on a distant shore. Number 7. Ambrosius Ehinger. The jungles of South America held more than just gold for those bold enough to enter. For Ambrosius Ehinger, a German nobleman working for the wealthy Welser banking family, the promise of fortune came with a price. In 1529, he sailed to the northern coast of what is now Venezuela, arriving in Santa Ana de Coro with around 281 settlers. Among them were Germans, Spaniards, and enslaved Africans. The settlement, granted under a deal with Emperor Charles V, gave the Welsers control of Klein Venedig in return for paying off his debts. Their mission was simple in theory: exploit the land's resources, especially its gold. By the end of that year, Ehinger led an armed venture toward Lake Maracaibo, clashing with the Coquivacoa people before establishing a settlement he named Neu-Nürnberg, later known as Maracaibo. Malaria struck soon after, forcing him to hand authority to Nicolas Federman in mid-1530 while he recovered in Hispaniola. When he returned, Ihinger's ambitions turned toward a rumored land of endless gold. On September 1st, 1531, he set out with 40 horsemen, 130 foot soldiers, and numerous indigenous allies. Hunger thinned their numbers, forcing the survivors to eat their horses and dogs. On May 27, 1533, near Chinacota in present-day Colombia, Chitarrero warriors attacked. A poisoned arrow pierced Ihinger's neck. He died 4 days later, hastily buried beneath a tree as his men retreated to Coro. Number 6. Captain James Cook. The Pacific Ocean has swallowed many who dared to cross it, yet few met their end the way Captain James Cook did. Known for charting vast stretches of unrecorded waters, he mapped New Zealand, Australia's eastern coast, and numerous islands, changing Europe's understanding of the Pacific forever. In 1778, on his third voyage, Cook reached the Hawaiian Islands for the first time. His arrival happened during the Makahiki Festival. It was a season devoted to the god Lono when war ceased, harvests were celebrated, and tributes were gathered. Because he arrived in this period, the Hawaiians treated him as if he were connected to Lono himself. Food and supplies flowed freely to the newcomers. But goodwill is fragile when two worlds collide. As weeks passed, Cook's crew strained local resources. Misunderstandings multiplied, and after sailors took wood from a sacred temple known as a heiau, relations soured even further. On February 14, 1779, a stolen boat pushed tensions past the breaking point. Cook attempted to seize Chief Kalaniopuu as leverage. The plan backfired. Warriors surrounded him in Kealakekua Bay, and chaos erupted. In the clash, Cook fell to the ground and was struck down. The battle claimed several of his men and many Hawaiians as well, ending one of the most celebrated naval careers in blood and surf. Number 5. James Chalmers. The waters along Papua New Guinea's coast once carried two men whose mission was rooted in faith. James Chalmers had called the region home for more than 2 decades. Oliver Fellows Tompkins was new by comparison, just over a year in. It was 1901 when their path led them toward Guaribari Island, a place along the Aird River where their lives would end in a way few could imagine. On the afternoon before their deaths, Tompkins noted that they had been holding a short service with their crew when movement appeared on the horizon. About 20 canoes drew closer, each filled with islanders. The visitors climbed aboard and stayed for hours, looking over every part of the vessel, from the ropes and sails to the buttons on the missionaries' shirts. They encouraged the men to come ashore that night. But Chalmers and Tompkins declined, saying they would visit the village the following morning. True to their word, they went ashore with several crew members the next day. What followed was swift and brutal. None of the party returned to the ship. Chalmers and Tompkins were killed, their remains consumed, and their bones kept as objects to display. Number 4. Mystery of the Cadets Flight. The morning skies over Central America can turn from calm to chaos in minutes, and that was exactly what awaited an Argentine Air Force training flight in November of 1965. Known as TC-48 or the Cadets Flight, it carried 68 people, 9 crew members and 59 passengers, among them 53 Argentine cadets, 5 officers, and a single Peruvian cadet. The Skymaster departed Panama in formation with its companion aircraft, TC-43. It checked in after passing navigation point Mike 5 over the Gulf of Mosquitoes at an altitude of 2,000 meters. Outside, the weather was breaking down. Heavy rain hammered the fuselage. Turbulence shook the aircraft. Visibility was gone. Then, at 6:36, a troubling call came over the radio. The pilot reported Engine 3 was on fire and Engine 4 had failed. He planned an emergency diversion, perhaps to Limon International or El Coco Airport in Costa Rica. Air traffic control in Tegucigalpa and a LASA cargo pilot both picked up the distress call. Moments later, radio silence. A United States Navy and Air Force search brought nothing at first. Eventually, debris began to appear. Life vests, caps, wreckage, all drifting near Bocas del Toro. The crash site was believed to be 30 kilometers off the Caribbean coast. Yet reports from Costa Rican witnesses told another story. Claims the plane flew inland before disappearing. Could it have crashed in the jungle instead? And if so, did anyone survive only to face the dangers of the rainforest and the tribes that lived there? Number 3. Stefan Ramin. The turquoise waters of the Marquesas Islands look like paradise from a distance, but in 2011 they became the backdrop to a horrifying tragedy. German-born Stefan Ramin and his girlfriend, Heike Dorsch, were no strangers to travel. They had been sailing around the world, stopping wherever curiosity pulled them. On August 30th, their journey led them to this remote part of French Polynesia. The islands were so captivating that the couple stayed twice as long as they had planned. During their extended stay, Stefan arranged an outing with a local named Arihano Haiti. This outing was what was described as a traditional goat hunt. Hours passed before the small dinghy returned to shore. This time, Stefan was missing. Haiti claimed there had been an accident and urged Dorsch to come quickly. But deep in the forest, the truth began to unfold. Haiti turned on her, aiming a shotgun at her face and threatening her life. The confrontation shifted into something even more terrifying as he assaulted her and tied her to a tree. Following this, he left. Hours passed before she managed to free herself. Seeing a flashlight approaching, she made the split-second choice to run. Reaching the shore, she found safety on another traveler's boat. When police searched the area later, they discovered human remains in the ashes of a campfire. Tests confirmed they belonged to Stefan Raman. Authorities concluded that Haiti had killed him. Number 2. Chris Kremers and Lisanne Froon. They came to Panama looking for adventure, not realizing how quickly it could turn into something else entirely. On April 1, 2014, 21-year-old Chris Kremers and 22-year-old Lisanne Froon, both from Amersfoort in the Netherlands, set out on the El Pianista Trail in Chiriquí province. Their plan was simple: hike to the Mirador viewpoint near the Baru volcano and return within the day. It should have taken 5 to 6 hours. They reached the top, but did not turn back. Instead, for reasons no one can confirm, they left the marked path and followed an isolated indigenous trail across the Continental Divide. The dog from their host family trotted along but returned alone that night. The women did not. By April 2nd, when they missed an appointment with a tour guide, the alarm was raised. Local police, volunteers, and the host family searched, followed by helicopters scanning the forest canopy. Even a $30,000 reward brought no answers. Weeks later, a Ngebe woman found a blue backpack by the Culebra River, hours from Boquete. Inside were dry belongings: passports, sunglasses, bras, cash, phones, and a camera, despite days of heavy rain. Phone logs showed repeated emergency calls in the days after April 1st. The camera revealed over 100 photos, including nearly 90 taken in the middle of the night, showing rocks, vegetation, and scattered belongings. Later searches uncovered Chris's shorts, a boot with Lisanne's foot, and scattered bones. Some showed signs of natural decay, others looked sun-bleached. Only a fraction of their remains were ever found. Could they have crossed paths with a hostile tribe deep in that forest? Number 1. Alejandro Labaca and Inés Arango. In July of 1987, Bishop Alejandro Labaca and Sister Inés Arango entered one of the Amazon rainforest's most remote regions with a single purpose. Both were Capuchin missionaries, dedicated to defending the rights of indigenous people against the reach of oil companies moving deeper into Ecuador's jungle. Labaca, who served as bishop of the Apostolic Vicariate of Aguarico, and Arango, a member of the Capuchin Tertiary Sisters of the Holy Family, had been warning of the dangers facing the Tagayari, an isolated tribe living without contact with the outside world. Oil exploration threatened to bring not just machines and pollution, but also violent encounters with outsiders. On July 21st, using an oil company helicopter, they descended by rope into Tagayari territory. Their aim was to make peaceful contact and prevent a clash between the tribe and armed mercenaries reportedly working for the oil companies. The following day, searchers discovered their bodies. Each bore wounds from spears and arrows, suggesting the Tagayari may have believed they were intruders. The deaths of Labaca and Arango forced immediate change. Ecuador's government suspended extractive work in the area, and by 1999 created the Tagayari Taramanane Intangible Zone. Enjoyed the video? Let us know with a like, and subscribe for more content coming soon. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.